And welcome back to Game Escape, here today to do a video that I've wanted to do for a long time. And as you guys know, I'm a big fan of the Sega Saturn, and since I've had the channel here, I've talked about the Saturn a lot. I've covered a lot of different Sega Saturn games, but the one genre, the one type of game that I haven't really delved into is the 2D fighter. And that's a shame, because the 2D fighters on the Saturn are absolutely incredible. So I had a little project this summer. I started the summer off and I was playing some of the titles that I had, and I was just having such a ball. I said, you know what, I have to try to import as many of the great Sega Saturn fighting games as I can, and of course I couldn't get all of them this summer, but I have a fair selection here, and I just really want to take the time to celebrate these absolutely amazing games. But one of the things that, of course, we suffered with here in the States is that the Sega Saturn was kind of positioned as a 3D machine here. And of course we know that it really wasn't. It was a tough, machine to program 3D games for. But what it did do well was 2D games. And this collection of fighters that I'm going to show you is really an homage to sort of this era in Japan of the Sega Saturn just having release after release of, in many cases, arcade-perfect fighting games. And one of the most, at least to me, unique aspect of playing these games on the Saturn is just kind of the clunky technology used to achieve this. I mean, you've got the kind of grindy, slow CD-ROM drive and the loading times, and you can hear the thing, spinning up. And a lot of the games require, I'll show this here, a lot of the games require this extra memory cartridge. This is a Capcom 4MB memory cartridge. There are 1MB memory cartridges. Very few of the SNK games have their own cartridge that actually has some of the sprites loaded into it. You can avoid all of that by getting the Action Replay 4-in-1 cart, which is still widely available. I recommend that. That's what I use. And then, of course, the Saturn controller, which is a great controller for fighting games. But, when you look at it, could you really play Street Fighter well on a pad like this? And, the answer is yes. So, all of these kind of oddball aspects of the Saturn coming together to, once the games load up, deliver some really amazing experiences. And that's what I want to share with you guys today. So I'm going to start off talking about the Capcom fighters. Of course, Capcom, really the main company for putting out fighters on the Saturn. They just have hit after hit. And we will start with the Street Fighter series. So one of the first ever games that I imported for the Saturn was this Street Fighter collection, and this is a lot of fun. This basically has Super Street Fighter 2, a Japanese tournament edition kind of Super Street Fighter 2 with a few little gameplay tweaks, and it has Street Fighter Alpha Gold. Now you're seeing Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 here. I'm going to save Alpha for a little bit later, but This was kind of my introduction, as it were, to how great the Sega Saturn 2D fighters can be. And the Super Street Fighter 2 games on here, about the closest thing that I got to going back to the arcades of the early 90s and, playing these games. I mean, the sprites, the music, I mean, it was just so close to what I remember, and I think it's a great starting point, because you get, two of the best, or two versions of one of the best fighting games of all time in Super Street Fighter 2, plus you get Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, or 02 Gold as it is in Japan. So a really, really great starting point, highly, highly recommended, and not too expensive these days. And then next up we have Street Fighter 0, the original Street Fighter Alpha. And this is a game that I think, to be fair, feels like a tech demo. It feels like an introduction to the greatness that was to come. Which is not to say it's a bad game. I think that a lot of people will write it off for that, but it's actually a really fun, solid first effort, and it has some really great level design. The sound, actually, in this particular version is very good, and we'll see that's not always the case with some of these Capcom games, but it has a really nice remix soundtrack. It has that great Guy convenience store level, which I absolutely love. Of course, not a lot of characters. It really, it's, if you can only buy one game in the Alpha series, obviously you're not going to buy this one. But it's kind of an interesting historical curiosity, if you will, just to kind of see what was coming next in the Street Fighter Alpha series. And, of course, I always say with these games, you kind of have to put on your, sort of activate your historical imagination and say, if I had played this in Japan, and I believe it came out in 95, 96, late 95, early 96, to kind of come home from the arcade, playing in the arcade, and then having it at home in early 1996, I think it would have been a pretty amazing experience. Now, I said I'm going to do Street Fighter here, but I really have to talk about Vampire Hunter, part of the Darkstalker series, at least what it's called here in the States. And this is, I believe, the earliest game in that series. And I'm including it in the Street Fighter games because I think this is kind of tech demo number 2, as it were, for what Capcom was going for. Now, I was never a fan of this game. I thought the characters never sort of captured my imagination. It was, back in the day, I was like, well, it's kind of like Street Fighter, but I'd just rather play Street Fighter. And going back to play it for this video, I kind of saw it as, this is much better than Street Fighter Alpha. It has, again, it's charting the course as far as gameplay and aesthetics that we'll see with Alpha 2 and Alpha 3. So, I think a lot of people would think that the second game, which I actually don't have, but I will get at some point, is the better one. But again, if you want, just for historical significance, to pick Street Fighter Alpha up, pick up the Vampire Hunter game, and just see what Capcom was up to in the mid-90s, and kind of see that launching point for their later greatness, I think it's an interesting game. And next up, of course, we have Street Fighter 02. And I've said it, many times before, this to me is the perfect fighting game. This is as good as it gets for Street Fighter. From the art style, to the controls, to the cast of characters, the backgrounds, the music. This is as good as Street Fighter has ever been. To me, it's the pinnacle. No Street Fighter game has come close to this. I love everything about it. I've said this on the channel before. I just think that, Capcom was firing on all cylinders, artistically and mechanically. And, it was funny because in the arcades, I remember this game coming out, and this was a time where I wasn't in the arcades as much. I had played it maybe a handful of times, and I didn't, appreciate it beyond the initial kind of wow factor of its newness back in the day. But I started playing it kind of in earnest when, probably about 10 years ago now, 9 or 10 years ago, the Street Fighter Alpha collection came out on the PS2, and I was able to spend some serious time with it, and I was just completely overwhelmed by how good this game is. If I could only have one Capcom fighting game, it would be Street Fighter 02. I would probably take the Gold Edition on the Street Fighter collection, but absolutely amazing. And lastly, for the Capcom Street Fighter series, Street Fighter 03. And, this is a game that, I played it. I played it maybe once or twice in the arcades. It came out fairly late, 98, I think, in the arcades. This particular version came out in 99, I believe. Double check that. Yeah, 99, and there was just something about it. It was like, to me, it wasn't as good as Street Fighter Alpha 2. So, I didn't play it on the Dreamcast, didn't play it on the PlayStation. I gave it very little time on the PlayStation 2 Alpha Anthology, but, you know, I had an opportunity to buy this game for the Saturn, and as you know, collectors know out there, this is one of the most expensive and sought-after Saturn games, and I kind of got it on a auction ending late at night on a holiday weekend, so it was expensive, but not as wildly expensive as it can get, and I just decided to go for it. And what can I say? It's, I mean, the story behind it is fascinating. Actually, the Dreamcast version was released earlier than this one, and the Dreamcast version had some issues. It had some balancing issues. I think it had some graphical issues. Like I said, I've never played it, but I remember people being upset about it. Of course, as I was researching this game, I read about the whole quote-unquote scandal behind it. And then Capcom went back, perfected it, and released the game on the Saturn. And it is really a monumental Saturn game. I can honestly say that, you know, especially not having liked the game in its arcade form. You know, I booted it up, and the first thing you notice is, you know, I've always said this, some of the best games are games that, you know, feel like they should be on the next-gen platform. You know, this felt like it should be on the Dreamcast. Everything from little touches like, you know, jumping from a fight back to the main menu, which you couldn't always do in some of the earlier fighting games, to, you know, absolutely incredible music, you know, just amazingly colorful, fluid animation. And I will say that, you know, as you're watching these videos here, my capture solution for the Saturn kind of captures the brilliance of the graphics, but not so much the fluidity of the movement. And so you're not really seeing how silky smooth this game is. You know, it's given me a new appreciation for the game just to kind of see it running on this older hardware. So, is it worth the $150 to $300 that it can sometimes go for on eBay? Probably not. I mean, certainly not. You know, I paid closer to the $150 than I did the $300. I mean, I don't think you should buy it at $300, but you know, it hovers around $200 on average, $250 sort of thing. But it's just an amazing curiosity for the Saturn, because it was, you know, a system that showed you, if you programmed a game properly, if you put in that heart and soul into the Saturn, it could deliver, you know, a nearly arcade perfect experience.